All right, thanks so much for being here. A lot of controversy. Well, I shouldn't say there's a lot of controversy. There are members of the Phoenix Police Department, and significant numbers of them from the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association, known as PLE. That's the union that represents rank and file street cops, to the Lieutenant and Sergeants Association, or Sergeant and Lieutenants Association. Well over 90% of people replying to an anonymous survey in both of those organizations are upset with the direction of the agency. And a lot of it has to do with what they say is how vague the new use of force policy is. They believe they could be boxing themselves in when they believe they're doing everything right, that it is not specific enough. So to get an expert opinion outside of the agency on either the command staff or in the rank and file officers on street cops, so to speak, Vincent Watkins joins us. He is a professor of criminal law, among many other things. Vincent, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me, man. I really, truly appreciate that. And one of the reasons I love coming on your show is because you're extremely objective. We're both pro law enforcement, and you have the ability to have the conversation. So we're just having the conversation.
Yeah.
I really want to talk about this issue, man. So thanks again for having me.
No, I appreciate it. I appreciate it very much. From your perspective, when you look at this, is this use of force policy vague in your mind? Do the officers have a reason to be concerned that they may be out of policy when they believe that they are in policy?
So, Mike, let's back this up just a little bit. And it's vague for a reason. If you take a look at Graham versus Connor, which was decided in 1989, and Graham versus Connor was the use of force decision, or the use of force guidelines that were created and decided upon back in 1989, over 36 years ago. It's objectively reasonable. So I think that actually gives police officers an advantage because you have split seconds to make a decision. So if you're objective, if you look at the facts, and if you're reasonable, in other words, what would a reasonable police officer do in a particular situation? I think it gives police officers a little bit of autonomy. I think it actually helps them even more because you can't go through each and every scenario each and every day. I mean, there are over 2,500 police officers on the Phoenix PD, and each scenario is different. But I believe if you have good faith and you're trying to do the right thing, being objective and being reasonable actually helps you in that situation.
So, but the question, I guess, when I hear the word reasonable, you and I might agree 8 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10 times on what reasonable is, but who gets to be in the end the arbiter of what's reasonable? What if an officer believes in his heart or her heart that what I did was reasonable under the circumstances, but if there's somebody else above them, a sergeant, lieutenant, and somebody else in the command staff that says, we believe it was unreasonable, isn't there a gray area there that could be a danger to cops?
So let's break this down just a little bit. So according to Graham versus Connor, there are 3 key bullet points. Number 1, what's the severity of the crime?
Mm-hmm.
Whether the suspect poses an immediate threat to the officers or others, whether the suspect is resisting arrest or attempting to flee. So even the fact that it's somewhat ambiguous, there are still 3 critical bullet points that an officer has the ability to follow. And again, Mike, we talked about this in class actually yesterday. And if an officer is reasonable at that particular time and makes the right decision wholeheartedly, it can clearly articulate why he or she did what they did. I firmly believe there will be supported. And again, the Supreme Court made this decision back in 1989, and there's case law to stand on. So, for example, if a police officer feels they made the decision that wasn't in line with the policy, they can actually go back and say, listen, we're basing this decision on a court case that was decided back in 1989. And in our operations class yesterday, we took a look at the policy, and it clearly states it, part of the information was taken from the Graham versus Connor case. And so, Mike, let me give you 2 real quick examples that I always like to refer to. Number 1, there's a case where Jacob Blake was shot in the back 6 times in Wisconsin. I'm not sure if you remember that case or not, but he was shot in the back 6 times, and the police officers were not charged, and rightfully so, because the police officers did everything possible within the guidelines of being objective and reasonable to make sure the case was taken care of properly. And then there's another case that I also talk about, Laquan McDonald in Chicago was shot in the back 16 times. and that police officer is in jail, and rightfully so. So I do believe this is the best policy that we have now, and I have a lot of friends on Phoenix PD that do a great job on a daily basis. So I think this particular case, particular policy is actually in their favor.
Is it true? When I talked about this the first few times I discussed it, is we are not really going to know how this works until there is a use of force question and it's put up against this policy and we see how it's handled. That maybe some of the concerns may feel legitimate now, but they might be a little bit premature until we see it in practice.
I would agree with you on that, Mike, because again, and I've never been a police officer, but I think that gives me an advantage as we talk about this case, because they make split decisions, they make split choices, split decisions. They have seconds to make those decisions, and so we may have a case where a use of force is being utilized, and we may have to look at it from that perspective and use Graham versus Connor as a baseline. But I'm firm believe, Mike, if we use this baseline, Graham versus Connor, we have a true objective baseline that we can use and guide police officers on. And I also believe that if a police officer, and I believe 90 to 95% of police officers do the right thing, I believe it protects them, and I believe it gives them actually more ability to do their jobs. It's like body cams, right?
Yeah.
So body cams protect police officers and citizens equally. So I think it's a good thing, Mike.
So the other concern that I've heard, and I think it was PLEA, the Phoenix Law Enforcement Association, that voiced this, is the last thing they want is, and you just mentioned it, the split-second decision that an officer has to make, that they don't want an officer that second-guesses what they might do because of confusion with this policy. Is there a way in your mind to have a better conversation? Is it necessary to have a better conversation? Because the officers had some hands-on training with this so that they understand better, so that they're not questioning themselves in that split-second decision.
Yeah, Mike, I think if you take a look at Supreme Court cases throughout the years, police officer safety has always been paramount. It's always been the number one objective as it relates to court cases. No different from Graham versus Connor, Terry v. Ohio. It's always been police officer safety first. And we've always heard that scenario or that statement where a police officer may say, "I was in fear of my life. I felt in danger. I felt my safety was in danger." And we've always favored the police officer in that situation, which is the right thing to do, because every day, Mike, a police officer is risking their lives.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you and I, we have great jobs, but we don't have to worry about being shot or shooting someone on a daily basis. And I think we understand police officers, that's a dangerous job, and they risk their lives on a daily basis. And we totally respect that, and we honor that, and we truly appreciate that. And I think many of these court cases favor police officer safety from that perspective. And now we're also trying to balance citizens' rights and the Constitution. So it's a delicate balance, Mike, but I think we're always trying to ensure police officers are safe, because they have 2 or 3 seconds to make a life decision choice. So that's always a tough situation.
What is the feedback? My last question is the feedback you're getting from students, because obviously for them it's still hypothetical and they're not police officers yet either. But what is their feedback when they're reading through this with you and you're discussing it based on the case law that you have? Do they like this? Do they understand it? Is it something that they believe is a step in the right direction? What's the feedback from the students?
So I'm a professor at Nelson University, Mike, and so they understand. I'm able to get their minds at a very young age, and we're able to talk about this. So the feedback that I receive is that they understand, and we actually have to walk through what's objective and what's reasonable. And it's very interesting, Mike. I had a question yesterday. I asked my students, "Hey, what's objective and what's reasonable? What is that?"
I think we just lost Vincent. If you get Vincent back, tell him I apologize. We were running out of time anyway, but I'd like to thank him for coming on. It was a great discussion from somebody that's teaching young students that will eventually, in many cases, become law enforcement officers. We'll try to talk to Vincent again.
Thanks for watching the Mike Broomhead Show. Catch up on Amazing Arizonans, a KTAR News podcast, and click the button in the middle to subscribe.